Good evening, everyone. This is part 2 of my The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask 3D video. The first part was talking about, in general, what makes the game great, in case some of you have never played the original Nintendo 64 version. Well, this video is for those of us, like me, who absolutely adored the Nintendo 64 version, and are wondering, is it worth buying this game when we've already beaten it in the original version? Well, I actually replayed Majora's Mask just a few months before buying this remake. And I found that because the Nintendo 64 game was fresh in my mind, it really felt like a huge speed run, especially with the handy new features that the 3DS has given. Like, most of them are pretty subtle. Like, the graphics are significantly improved. Like, this isn't just a simple port. Like, the game looks light years better than the muddy graphics on the Nintendo 64. And a few more accessible features have been added, like the Song of Double Time now lets you skip forward to a specific hour. The save statues are now permasaves, which may kind of frustrate those of us who liked the adrenaline rush of having to rush through the dungeon as quick as we could. But they can be good if you're like in a hurry and need to set your 3DS down quickly. And the Bomber's Notebook has especially received a radical redesign, making it much easier to keep track of side quests and even set alarms for when you need to be in a certain place at a certain time. So accessibility-wise, it's definitely a much smoother experience. But on the other hand, this also isn't a master quest, so you really won't be finding a whole lot of new content. So, for those of us that were hoping this might be the glorious Majora's Mask Master Quest that we've been wanting ever since Ocarina of Time had that, you're kind of out of luck. Pretty much everything is as you remember it, save for a few subtle tweaks here and there. Now, the boss battles are the only exception to that. The 4 major dungeon battles have all received a significant upgrade. In fact, the guys in the Stone Tower Temple, I barely even recognized them anymore. They received such dramatic upgrade. Like now, when Link puts on the giant mask, he doesn't just become like a big version of himself. Like he literally has another transformation. I won't spoil it for you if you haven't gotten that far, but it basically changes the entire way of looking at the fight. And for that alone, I would say this game warrants a return because you can relive or reinvent these famous bosses. But the problem is that the final battle has received no changes at all, which is kinda odd, considering that the other bosses are phenomenal. Like, Odalawa, for instance. Odalawa, you could basically just hack and slash at him in the original. In this, he has a very clearly defined weak spot on the back of his head, and it kind of reminds me of fighting Thyrus in Twilight Princess. There's more of a strategic aspect to it that makes the battle more engaging and more adrenaline pumping. And you actually need to search for hearts a few times because Odalawa's moveset has changed. So if you think you know how to use your shield well, think again. You'll also be glad to know that the game did not take away that which made the series beloved. Like, a lot of remakes tend to butcher that which made a classic, and this game doesn't. The dialogue is mostly intact, only changed if there's a minor tweak. Like, for instance, you get the Bomber's Notebook mandatorily in the storyline rather than optionally, so there's a bit of dialogue to explain that. Or a character might point out the new Sheikah stone in the clock tower, but otherwise the dialogue is just as thought-provoking as you remember it. It still has that same blur effect during the cinematics that gives it a dreamy feel, but with the 3DS's extra horsepower, now it looks even more dreamy and cool than you remember it. And especially the interiors are utterly gorgeous. Like, sometimes I just love wandering around in the buildings just because there's way more posters to look at. There's more detailed wall and floor textures. There's like little twigs sticking out of the grass when you're walking in the field. Little touches like that. It's definitely not a 3DS mind blower in terms of the graphics, but it's amazing to see how far Majora's Mask has come. I guess the only other reason I can think of for recommending this game if you haven't, or if you've already played the Nintendo 64 version, is the fishing ponds. There are apparently 2 fishing ponds. I only found 1 during my playthrough, but apparently there are 2. And I didn't actually try them, but I really liked how fishing was handled in Ocarina of Time. So if it's anything like that, then I'm sure that's a very welcome new addition to the game, and should help with bringing a lot of new side quests in a game that already had a lot of side quests by Zelda standards. So, new boss battles, new fishing pond, upgraded Bomber's Notebook, a few tweaks here and there to make it more accessible, but it'll still mostly feel like a speedrun. I'm sorry, but there's really no other way to put it. And even after you beat the game, the ending is still fundamentally the same, the final battle is the same. There's a new credits sequence afterwards, but basically it's just a new song that thanks the people that helped with the remake. So unlike Ocarina of Time 3D, where you had a master quest to look forward to, this game doesn't give you any post-game benefits. So, a little bit of a disappointment in that regard. I still say it's a phenomenal remake. Like, it's not like Ocarina of Time, where they just were like, it's not broken, so we won't try hard to fix it. Because there were definitely some problems in the original that were addressed. But the problems that were addressed were mostly there to draw the newcomers in. Those of us who have already played the game might say, oh, well, this is a lot less of an eyesore, and it's a lot more convenient, but it's still mostly the same thing. So, if you haven't played it, my verdict is get it. I would probably rate it a 9 out of 10 in terms of sheer awesomeness, but in terms of re-getting it, probably more like 8.5, 8-ish. Anyway, thank you for listening to my spiel. Hopefully I sounded somewhat professional in this, because I'm not a journalist or anything, and let me know if there's any other game reviews you want me to tackle. So with that, stay epic and keep the faith.